Okay, everyone, welcome to our CMS in Touch webinar series. We're going to be starting in a minute, but if I can just ask you as you join us to introduce yourselves on the chat function. So just say your name and where you're coming from, and I'll be passing over to the hosts in 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone to the CMS in Touch webinar on critically envisioning the business, economy and society in post-pandemic times. I'm just going to pass over to introduce the theme to Gaurav Talan. So I'll just ask you to unmute and show us your video, Gaurav.
I'm unable to start my video, Kat. Yes, now I can. So thank you, Kat. Hi, everyone. My name is Gaurav Talan, and I welcome you all to this webinar on critically envisioning the business, economy, and society in post-pandemic times. The United Nations framework for the immediate socio-economic response to the COVID-19 crisis warns that the COVID-19 pandemic is far more than a health crisis, and it is affecting societies and economies at their core. The pandemic has been labeled as a black swan already, and while we are not sure about when it will peak, we are already getting signs that it is changing the economies and societies as we know them. The pandemic has far-reaching consequences, and it is affecting the human lives directly and indirectly. The economic fallout of the pandemic is evident and is followed by consequences like massive job losses, falling demand, protectionism, uncertain business environment, rising debt levels, and many more. And it does not stop there. It does not impact everyone equally. It impacts everyone differently. So while some individuals see no or little impact, some individuals, especially in South Asia, who were able to come out of extreme poverty in the last decade are being pushed back into it. A steady rise in income inequality is followed by that. So like these obvious economic fallouts, the social impact of the pandemic also presents a very disturbing picture. We have seen migrant crisis in India, refugee crisis everywhere, rising polarization in different countries, political mismanagement of pandemic, and even rising authoritarianism in certain countries. Even total authoritarianism in many countries, not in a few countries. So it is also having an adverse impact on the education, and we discussed that in the great detail in the previous webinar in this series. Lockdowns that come along with the COVID-19 also bring their own challenges, like domestic violence, problems in elderly care, mental well-being, rising social inequalities with respect to gender, caste, race, and religion. Persistent challenges like global warming are also getting neglected while we fight this pandemic. We also need to ensure that these challenges are also adequately addressed while we deal with COVID-19. With these economic and social inequalities that come with this pandemic, the question is, are we all in this together? That is the main question. Or is this pandemic dividing the world more than it is uniting it? Is it affecting everyone equally? Or some are more unfortunate than the others? That is the question that I come up with. With WHO saying that the worst may not be over yet, we don't know when it will peak. We certainly need to prepare better and come up with policies that are holistic in nature. Even better if we could transform this crisis into an opportunity by making a resolve to reduce these socio-economic inequalities. So with this thought, I invite my colleague, Dr. Ajay Sharma, to introduce our speakers for the day.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of Shri Aurobindo College of Commerce and Management, I feel indeed privileged today to welcome the speakers of today, the privileged attendees today who will be in a position to listen from such a learned panel and discussant. And especially I'm thankful to my team in the Indraprasth University and abroad for coordinating it. Let me introduce the speakers today. Dr. Pritam Singh, who has done DLit from Oriel College, Oxford, where he was awarded Charles Wallace Scholarship. Before coming to Oxford, he taught at University of Delhi as lecturer in economics. After teaching for 3 decades at Oxford Brookes University, he has recently retired and was awarded Distinguished Professor of Eminent status. His special area of interest is development and environmental economics. He has published extensively in the area with a focus on India and Punjab. He is currently studying the spatial shift in global economy with its implication for global ecological sustainability. Professor Glenn Muschert is a professor of sociology in Department of Humanities and Social Science at Khalifa University. He has formerly served on Faculty of Sociology, Social Justice, and Comparative Media Study at Miami University. He has served as editor for teaching sociology and is on editorial advisory board of various journals such as Social Problems, Secrecy, and Society, and the Turkish Journal of Sociology. Professor Muschert is a sociologist of social problems who research digital inequalities, the social use of technology, and surveillance systems of social control. His research has appeared in a variety of academic volumes and journals in sociology, criminology, and media studies. Dr. Paresha Sinha is a in international management and marketing, University of Waikato, and a research fellow of the New Zealand India Research Institute. Her interest in intersection of international business, strategy, and international entrepreneurship. She is the senior auditor of International Journal of Emerging Markets and serves on editorial board of Journal of Global Operational and Strategic Outsourcing and on editorial review board of Journal of Business Research. She has wide variety in a variety of leading journals, including Organization Studies, Journal of Business Ethics, and Journal of Business Search. I welcome all the speakers to today's webinar, and I hope these deliberations will go a long way in understanding the impact of COVID on economy, sociology, other related issues. Thanks a lot. Now I will request Gaurav to carry on. Mr. Gaurav.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ajay. Our first speaker of the day is Professor Pritam Singh, who will be presenting us a critical perspective on global economy with respect to COVID-19. I invite Professor Pritam to please take the stage and continue with his speech.
Hello.
Sir, you are audible.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with you. And I just want to timer myself so that, okay. So I want to start by saying that we are faced with three crises simultaneously: the global health crisis, which we are discussing, the global economic crisis, and ecological crisis. Unless we see the linkages between three of them, we won't be able to appreciate the cause of this crisis, nor will we be able to have an appropriate strategy to deal with this crisis in the kind of recovery which is being talked about. So I want to put this subject in the context of global climate change, both from the viewpoint of understanding the cause of crisis as well as suggesting the way forward. In terms of the cause of this crisis, two things are important. One, that this COVID-19 has basically come as a result of transmission of infections from animals to human beings. That there have been always problems, animals had problems, various kind of illnesses, but something which has happened drastically is that these pathogens are being passed over to animals, to human beings, and then human beings to other human beings, and so on and so forth. This is not the first, and this is not going to be the last, but this tells us something about the global change which has taken place. Second is that it also tells us about the globalization of food systems and globalization of tourism, which leads to kind of transportation of human beings, commodities, and also the disease. So in terms of the cause of the crisis is to do with the process which has led to invasion of space of non-human living species by human species. Now, this is not something which has happened recently. This has been happening since the time of agricultural settlement, that where human beings are invading more and more the space which was meant for all other living beings, animals, plants, birds, and so on and so forth. But this process has been accentuated by the advent of capitalism. Whether one thinks capitalism started 500 years or 200 years, it does not matter. The point is that capital has a way of relating to natural resources, whether it's land, water, forests, mountains, from the viewpoint of using each of these resources for profit maximization. And that's led to deforestation, that's led to invasion of space of other living species, and that's led to contact with other living species, non-human living species, and that has led to the transmission of this pathogen from animals. And in this case, no one is definite, but most speculative work, which has some validity, is that it came from bats in China, where there was live markets. So that is the kind of cause. So we understand that it's related with global climate change. Now, global climate change has two dimensions. One is about global heating. I'm using the word heating, not warming, because increasingly it's being recognized that warming suggests some kind of a slow response. But what is happening is not actually a slow response. It's a very fast response. So global heating is the one. The other is the biodiversity loss. That the rate at which the species are being lost is unprecedented. What used to happen in hundreds of years is now happening in decades. So it is this which has led to invasion of the space of other species by human beings. So once we understand this process, then we have some idea how to relate to the crisis which has arisen from this, both in the domain of health as well as in economy and ecology. Now, in terms of economy, this is the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression, but some speculations say that, for example, in England, this is the biggest crisis ever happened, not only since the Great Depression of 1929-33, but ever happened in terms of degree of the deceleration of economic activity, the retrenchment of human beings, the consequences on living standards, and so on and so forth. Now, one response to this is that what we need to do is the kind of Keynesian solution, which was done during the Great Depression. That is, states should intervene, markets have shown total failure, markets are responsible for the destruction of the environment, and the destruction of the environment is responsible for COVID-19, and therefore market as an institution does not work. It's a massive market failure in the same way which has happened during the Great Depression, and Keynesianism came into being. So people are talking about economic recovery in terms of state intervening. The state is having to intervene. It's intervening everywhere. You know, it may be uneven in different parts of the world, but it's intervening everywhere to protect jobs or to give them, you know, kind of temporary measurements of income support and so on and so forth. But state is intervening. Now, I want to make a criticism of that view, that Keynesian solution is again applicable in the same way as it was applicable in 1929-33. Why? Because Keynesian solution was a way of giving economic stimulus. Now, when Keynesian solution was offered, there was no global climate change. At least there was no knowledge, and also global warming wasn't taking place, or global heating wasn't taking place. We are living in a different era. Global heating is a rare problem. All international climate scientists are united on this view that if by 2030, which is only 10 years, if by 2030, the average global temperature is not kept below 1.5 degrees centigrade, our planet will face unprecedented crisis, insurmountable crisis, which we will not be able to handle it. So we have a window of opportunity only of 10 years. So Keynesian solution is kind of out. But we also need to argue that capitalism is no longer the solution, that capitalism is actually responsible for the crisis which has happened. The way international globalization, capitalist globalization has taken place, linking every part of the world, facilitating international trade, including international meat markets, which are responsible for transmission of this view. So we need to have a different economic paradigm, different economic system, different economic theory. We are at that level of crisis in human civilization. But we need to have big thinking and not carry on with the same kind of rotten stuff which has been paraded for decades. Now, one might say that what I'm suggesting is some kind of a socialism. I am not really particular about this, what you call it, whether you call it socialism, cooperative economy, associated economy, whatever it's called. But the point is that it's a society and economy where producers are associating with each other and they are close to the place where they are working. So we have to move to a stage which can be called deglobalization, but deglobalization can sometimes give a misleading interpretation, because I do not mean to suggest that we should not have international cooperation. We should have international cooperation, international solidarity, but kind of capitalist globalization which has taken place, where capital moves everything. There is a kind of trade of commodities, but of course restriction on trade of people, because that's why various kind of migration restrictions are there. That capitalist globalization has to come to an end, and we need to think of a different alternative. So what I want to suggest is that we need to start thinking about local self-sufficiency, local modes of production, and stoppage to unnecessary trade and unnecessary transportation. I'll just give you one example of the waste and environmental damage which takes place by excessive trade. Every day from England, I mean not during the COVID period, but before, every day hundreds of trucks from England go to France carrying English milk and English cheese. And then on the same side, hundreds of trucks are coming from France, bringing in French cheese. Now it's a total waste of resources. And they are contributing to use of fuel, emissions, and contributing to global warming. Why can't we live with the English cheese in England? Why do we have to pick up all the French cheese? Why can't people live with the fruits which they eat? Why do they have to have strawberries which are produced in England? They must have it in India. Why can't we do this? So we need to have new agricultural system where people who participate in those activities, they're close to their sources where they are. And I must also emphasize that when I'm talking about socialism, I'm also critical of the socialism which took place in Soviet Union and other places, which was also based on the same idea that we need to produce more and more, we need to have high GDP, we need to have high growth and rise in per capita income. Their view was simply this, that if we have planning instead of market, we will be able to show that socialism is a superior economic system and we'll win the battle in the realm of ideas. But the end point was still the same. We have to question that end point, that we have reached that stage in human history. We cannot continue with unimpeded growth. The planet Earth does not have the resources to accommodate that kind of economic growth. So we need to look at needs. We need to look at our desires. We need to look at our consumption patterns. We need to look at daily lifestyles. We need to look at the totality of that in such a way that we have a lifestyle which is compatible with the environment, and that lifestyle fits in with an economic system which is compatible with the ecology. So that is the kind of way I would like to suggest, that we need to have big thinking, not get into small thinking about government need to do this, government need to do that. We could reapply Keynesianism. That's not going to be possible. That will just accentuate the crisis. And as I said, and I want to repeat this, that we have a window of opportunity only for 10 years. If we do not stop global emissions, the global temperature will go beyond 1.5 degree, and there will be irreversible changes which we will not be able to handle. Can someone tell me how much time do I have left with? I think I have
3 more minutes. 3 more minutes.
Yeah. So this means that we need to look at different systems of production, different systems of exchange, different systems of consumption. Okay, because what is an economy? Economy is a combination of production, exchange, distribution, and consumption. Okay, and each of these requires different ways of looking at this. That the production technologies which we use, they have to be in such a way that they do not destroy the environment. We of course engage with the environment because we fulfill our needs. And most important, we need to recognize that this planet is not meant only for human beings. This planet is meant for all living creatures, animals, birds, plants, bees, and only by recognizing, we will recognize the ecological interdependence between different species. Now, this also means changing our consumption habits. And I'm not saying that all of us should become vegetarian one day, but if we can stop reducing consumption of meat, that will be one step. Maybe then we can move over to vegetarianism, and maybe we can go beyond that, we can become vegans, okay? We have to have different kind of transportation system, that we don't depend upon cars and air transport, which is so much based on fuel. We need to give emphasis more on public transport, redesigning of transport, more use of cycles, more use of walking, and also changing of work practices, that people's workplace should be close to with their place of living. So we need to look upon all energy efficiency measures, whether in the mode of transportation, whether in the mode of production, similarly in the realm of consumption. So it's a totality of this which will lead us to come out of this crisis. Otherwise, my fear is that this COVID crisis may get over in a year and a half with enormous cost which we are paying, but it might get over. But we will be faced with an even more vicious infection in the years to come if we do not stop the way it has been going on in the realm of economy and mode of consumption and mode of living. So we need a total new thing on all this. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Pritam. That was indeed thought-provoking. Climate change and biodiversity issues are in fact the next big challenge standing right in front of us. A unique economic solution is indeed needed to tackle the twin problems of pandemics and climate change together. With this, I now invite Professor Glenn to present his views on critical social capital theory with respect to COVID-19.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for your time today. I want to thank the organizers for pulling this together. It seems to be a wonderful group of people to bring numerous perspectives together. I'm humbled to be invited to be one of the speakers today, and I can just share you my general perspective on being a sociologist of social problems for the last 2 decades, and also I have recently moved from the United States to be based in Abu Dhabi. So, and I have this kind of perspective from different regions of the world. So I have been engaged in the study of social problems since my graduate student days back in 1990s. And in particular, I've always been interested in digital technologies. And one of the things that I've noticed about digital technologies is that there's this kind of separation between the people, the psychologists, the sociologists who study the use of digital technologies and the people who are the techies. And I always try to tell people that the technologies are only effective or damaging if in use by the people who are using those technologies. So, for example, I've studied digital divide, and in so many places around the world, people have put in policies, governments have put in policies that if we could only kind of send broadband out to the villages or send like 5G out to the mountainside where the people are living, then like suddenly the lagging development of a region of the country will like kind of take off. And more recently, I've done a study in Turkey that looks at people in East Anatolia, which is the kind of the economically lagging side of Turkey, closer to the border with Iran and Georgistan, and found that, like, you know, so they have put in a lot of infrastructure, but the main impediment is that the people don't have the skills to be able to use the internet effectively. More, they actually know that they can't use the internet effectively. They feel like they're missing out, but they don't know how to kind of jump across and to accumulate the digital skills. So anyway, that's the kind of perspective I'm coming from as a researcher. It's about like kind of like how do we use the technology to engage, to make progress on solving some social problems. And so I can also speak to, for about 20 years, I've been involved in a project at the Society for the Study of Social Problems. It's the academic association in many of the people are in North America, but it publishes the sociology journal Social Problems, one of the top sociology journals. And we have been engaging in a project where we try to engage in public sociology to get the information out to people who are non-technical. So I can put in the, I'll put in a couple of links here when I'm done, but basically there's a couple of books that we've published a series. One is called Agenda for Social Justice, which takes a US approach. And also there's another one called the Global Agenda for Social Justice, which takes a global approach. These books are a little bit different than the typical academic books. And what they do is the chapters identify a significant problem, a noted social problem, something like, you know, homelessness or racism or lack of access to medical care and so on. And then for each of the problems, the chapter lays out the definition of the problem, kind of like what is it, what are the parameters of the problem. And then it also gives evidence, but most of the chapter is actually about policy suggestions or solutions that might either reduce the problem or solve the problem. And one of the big challenges we have is that we want something that is kind of like actionable, that is like a policy that is doable. So sometimes we have people who suggest something like, you know, fix capitalism or stop racism, and we don't necessarily like kind of, we try to steer them away from that because we want it to be like, we want the person who's reading about the problem to have a sense that there are some things that we can do to fix the problems. So, so in my personal like academic trajectory, I now work in a department of humanities and social sciences, and in the Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi, the business faculty are also in this department, and so I work very closely with economists and people in human resource management and finance. And one of the things that's been most exciting for me is this idea that, you know, that people in the business studies are much more focused in on ESG and SDG issues. And I think that sociology may be a little bit behind the curve in terms of like not recognizing that these SDGs are set as a global agenda for the solution or the addressing of all of the significant problems, or most of the most significant problems of humanity in the next 10 years. So I've been like kind of pleasantly surprised to, you know, go to economics or business, international business sessions and hear people talking about SDGs. So one difference I can say is that like in the United States, the business was not necessarily so much about business, it was not so much about like social issues. It was just about kind of like business issues. And so I kind of hypothesize that this is because like kind of the social network of like the social welfare network, which although eroding is still relatively strong in a place like that. So that business means like kind of business performance versus if I go to places in the developing world, when they're talking about business development, they're also talking about like kind of satisfaction of people's needs, providing economic security and for the needs of the population, right? So I think that COVID has laid bare this point that even in the countries that have the highly developed social welfare systems, that there may be a challenge in the current system, as Professor Singh was saying in the previously, there may be a challenge in the system for the ability to provide. I mean, we already know that the system cannot provide for quite a few of people, the poorest of the poor in the low-income countries, right? However, we see it kind of that eroding in many places. So you see the structural problems, like in the United States with massive unemployment, as being kind of noteworthy as well. We also see the structural problems of like kind of the displacement of the migrant workers inside India, and kind of the lockdown and how they had to, you know, had no transportation, and the human suffering on a massive scale that we saw in places like India. So I think that COVID, I was like, okay, we have like economists and we have people in finance and banking talking about ESG and achieving SDGs and these kind of benchmarks. And I thought, this is really great. And so I also thought to myself, yeah, well, we're in the biggest bull market of history, okay? And so I sort of had this sense of like waiting for the fallout to say, if we end up having a crash, then will the banks and will the corporations stick with these ESG or principles for meeting sustainable development goals, or would that just be like kind of something that, you know, oh, well, it would be nice if we could do that, but sorry, we don't have time. We don't have time for it, or it can't be a priority right now. So those are my kind of general thoughts on, and I also you know, wanted to talk a little bit about like how I see a need for more interaction between social scientists and people in business, economics, finance, and wanted to just put out the idea that that these issues of the COVID has clarified that social, economic, human, psychological, and as well as ecological issues cannot be separated. And so it's hard to find the types of forum where you get people from so many different fields together to talk about something. Now, there are challenges, of course, because we publish in different journals, we have different departments, and we in some ways speak different languages. But what if there were a possibility for a discussion of like kind of the universities and scholars could engage? Although our security is being eroded by the neoliberal governance of our organizations in universities, you know, kind of the for-profit or efficiency mindedness. The universities are probably some of the best institutions that we have to take on these bigger questions of like, how can we leverage our academic knowledge to help with human flourishing? And indeed, as Professor Singh said, maybe with the flourishing of the natural environment as well. So structurally, all of us scholars are have to, you know, forced more or less to publish in the top-ranking journals and those kinds of things. However, there may be a kind of a countercurrent and a need for engaging in a public scholarship, that is to get the information out to the people. So what if there were a project such as the Agenda for Social Justice, which is really about sociology, social problems, but there was a project for economic and social and human and ecological problems, and that it would define the problem. It would give evidence about what the extent and the nature of the problem is, and then it would propose solutions in a non-technical way that might be adopted by policymakers around the world, that might be adopted by people who make corporate decision makers or entrepreneurs and so on. So I'm reminded of I just have a couple of minutes left, but I'm reminded of the president. There was a presidential address of the Association of American Mathematicians, and he called it Mathematics for Human Flourishing. And, you know, I was intrigued by this title, right? I was intrigued by the title because I was saying to myself, like, you know, I mean, I like maths, don't get me wrong, but it was also like a bunch of courses that I took, and I do statistical analysis sometimes and things like that. But like, I never really thought about maths as being something that would take on this idea of human flourishing. And I wanted to suggest that as a possibility that we could extend that. How can we leverage our knowledge in social sciences, in business and economics fields, and to bring about human flourishing? Okay, and on that note, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Glenn. That was really very interesting. When even the developed countries are facing challenges to cope up, frequent discussions and skill development programs can actually be very helpful in coping up with many social issues we are facing in these times. So with these words, I now invite Dr. Paresha for her thoughts on international business management during and post-COVID-19.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Paresha, Sinha, and I'm speaking to you all from New Zealand. It's my pleasure to meet you in this forum, and I want to thank the organizers for inviting me today to talk to you. I want to continue today the discussion which has been kind of started by the previous panelists, and I acknowledge their insights about the limits of global capitalism, as well as the need for self-sufficiency, as well as the need to change consumption patterns, as well as the lack of digital literacy and social problems related to that. However, I teach in the business faculty, and therefore my positioning is slightly different. And I would like to now talk about how I see what is happening today, and what are the issues we would like to focus upon. So the first thing I want to draw our attention as critical management communities of scholars is, I know we are a diverse group of scholars coming from different disciplines, but having a common sensitivity to the issues what are being presented by the pandemic. So I see that we are experiencing 5 different types of shocks due to the pandemic. Many of us are aware of the health shock, and this has been experienced by all countries, and health systems, different types of health systems have experienced extreme stress due to the health shock, what we have been experiencing. Economic shocks, which we are experiencing in different countries, the contraction of the economy, the lack of growth, and therefore the contraction and lack of opportunities for growth, which we are experiencing. The third type of shock, what we are also experiencing and continue to experience, is the supply shock, especially for goods related to the health kind of issues, the PPE equipments, the medical supply shortages, and also due to the protectionist orientation of certain governments, and perhaps a response to the actual economic and health shock. We are having certain grains being restricted, the exports of certain grains being restricted by certain governments. And I'm not questioning that, but this also creates a supply shock for the rest of the world who are dependent on those supply chains. The fourth type of shock we are experiencing, if I may like to say, is the demand shock. The lack of demand for certain services, especially in the tourism sector, in the airline industry, and also in many other industries. But if we look at the international student we are having a demand shock, lack of demand I'm talking about. And all these different types of shocks have created what I would call a psychological shock, our inability to cope with these types of shocks, this type of situation. Some of us have never experienced these types of limited circumstances, especially in the Western world. The restrictions on our freedom, the restrictions on our growth opportunities, and so on and so forth. And therefore, I am kind of firstly arguing that as a result of these interactive forces, the existing inequalities are being exacerbated and new inequalities are being created. So that is my first argument. We had unequal world at the start of the pandemic, and now we have new inequalities. So next slide, please. So first and foremost, my first observation is that you are seeing an inequality in terms of top earning workers and the low income workers. So if you look at top earning workers, they are able to work from home, whereas low income workers are not able to work from home. Very, very simple. And we have seen this. So the ability to have remote work facilities which is a kind of advantage of a top earning workers. We are not talking about the wages. Now we are talking about the environment in which, safe environment in which you can work, whereas the need to go and do a face-to-face type of work, which is the case of low-income workers. Yeah. So here we are coming across, and as the previous panelists talked about, the digital skills, digital work, digital skills and digital literacy, the inequality being kind of exposed. It was already there, but now we are experiencing the consequences of being digitally illiterate, yes? So this is causing your ability to have safe work environment, negotiate a safe work environment for yourself as a worker, and the lack of social distancing at work, which continues to be the problem faced by low-income workers in those face-to-face work situations, yes? As a result, what we are seeing is job security is lower, which is likely to kind of now create a job crisis, because either those workers will not work, they will remain unhealthy, they will not be able to. And so there is a full-blown social crisis in the making. And so the first kind of insight we are having is the existing inequalities between high wage earners as well as low income earners. We have new inequalities being created. So we had to recognize that new inequalities are being created by the pandemic. Next slide, please. I also want to draw everyone's attention, and perhaps in our own family, in our own kind of social circles, we have the youth, the new youth who are coming into the job market. Their prospects due to the pandemic are permanently harmed. And if there is a prolonged slump or slowdown, the youth, the young generation, they are going to experience three types of shocks as I see it. First is the loss of employment, and this will drive them to precarious employment, whatever they choose to choose as their alternative, yes. We would expect youth to have ample training and skilling opportunities, but the pandemic and situation is removing these training and skilling opportunities which other youth generations ahead of them, previous generations have enjoyed. So overall, we are seeing that the youth are facing major obstacles to enter jobs or to change jobs. This is very different from the previous era, pre-pandemic era, where all these opportunities were available. So as a result of that, I am seeing the loss of new talent and positive energy which youth bring. And therefore, I see that if we are unable to manage these issues, we are likely to have slower recovery from the pandemic itself, because we are losing on new talent and energy, which is being kind of deprived of these opportunities. Next slide, please. So the other place, and I think the previous panelists have talked about it, but the informal workers is a real situation, because their incomes have fallen significantly due to the pandemic. You know, we are talking about street food vendors, barbers, taxi drivers, tradespeople, and I'm not only talking about migrants in let's say India, but also the gig economy workers and informal economy workers in you know, because they cannot stay at home without starving, and they cannot work without being exposed to the virus. And here we want to recognize that informal workers have little social protection to fall back on. So there is underemployment and unemployment in the informal economy, and that is a real concern for all of us. Yes, next slide, please. One of the areas which is of a great concern to us is the issue of garment industry workers. What is happening in that industry is of a great concern because not only they are losing jobs due to order cancellation, the contraction in demand for fashion clothing and these things. What is more, we are hearing stories about workers not being paid because even for the work that has been completed. So, and those workers who have managed to keep their jobs, they are working in factories and also staying on site. So there is lack of social distancing, their health problems and health inequalities are expanding due to these kind of concerns. Yeah. So we are seeing more unsafe working conditions, especially for pregnant and elderly workers. Yes, next slide, please. So I also want to kind of draw attention to a very perennial problem, but we had been making some kind of progress over the last 20 years. But this pandemic is also causing extreme poverty in extreme poverty in more families in this underprivileged class, and therefore the children in poor and disadvantaged communities are a greater risk of child labor now, child marriage, child trafficking, and we are going to reduce the global gains due to this pandemic on this issue. This is a genuine concern for us, and we should be aware of these things happening as we speak. Yes. Next slide, please. So I want to now kind of come to my vision, having kind of raised these issues and highlighted the concerns what I'm having here, that whatever our vision for the future, we want to have a recovery from the coronavirus crisis must have gender empowerment at its heart. Solutions should actions and policies to prevent child labor should be more rigorous than the pre-crisis stage. We have to provide voice to women and social dialogue with informal workers to understand the unique situation and start co-creating solutions for transition of these informal economy workers to the formal economy. And I also want to raise the importance to introduce initiatives to help people who are digitally illiterate to acquire the digital skills needed in the post-COVID economy. And then, of course, we also need to be concerned in the organization itself that how can we prevent burnout in remote workers? This is also another issue I'm trying to kind of recognize here. And this is some of the very bare minimum points I feel that we need to focus on. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Paresha. The pandemic has indeed ensured that all the possible shocks, including health, economic, and psychological shocks, fall upon us at the same time. And the economic and social inequalities that follow these shocks are indeed worrying. Post-pandemic visions are really very interesting. I thank Professor Pritam, Professor Glenn, and Dr. Paresha for presenting their views and touching on diverse issues within the area and igniting a thought-provoking discussion. Now we move on to the discussant section where the topics will be discussed further, and the discussants may also build further on these topics and present their own inputs, if any. For that, I now invite my colleague Anshita Yadav to introduce the discussants and chair this session.
Thank you, Gaurav. Hello, everyone. Now I take pleasure in welcoming all the four discussants. First, we have Professor Jeffrey Inman. He is the Albert Wesley Frey Professor of Marketing and Associate Dean of Research and Faculty at the Cards Graduate School of Business, University of Pittsburgh, USA. He is currently Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Consumer Research. His research focuses on consumer relevant issues such as factors that increase healthy eating, in-store choice, and the influence of technology on consumer behavior. He has published over 50 articles across a variety of journals, including the Journal of Consumer Research, the Journal of Marketing Research, Marketing Science, and the Journal of Marketing. He has also won the Marketing Science Institute H. Paul Root Award for his contribution to the advancement of the practice of marketing as published in the Journal of Marketing. Next, we have Professor Hugh Bruel, who works as a professor of international business and business diplomacy and global talent management at the Hotel School, The Hague, Netherlands. His thesis focused on the implementation of ITs in office environments. Articles derived from this EHRM study have been published in academic and professional journals. His research focused on international business, international management, international HRM and technology, commercial diplomacy, business diplomacy, and so on. He has published over 25 journal articles in International Journal of Human Resource Management, European Journal of International Management, Management and Technological Challenges in the Digital, amongst the few of those articles. Next, we have Professor Madan Mohan Goyal, who is a former Vice Chancellor and endowment professor. He possesses 40 years of teaching experience, including 16 years as a professor specialized in the economics of human resource development at the Kurukshetra University, India. He possesses administrative experience of 16 years in various capacities, including Vice Chancellor at JNU, Jaipur, and the Director of Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development, looked after an institution of national importance by the Act of Parliament, for which the then President of India appointed him. Professor Goyal has international recognition and was bestowed upon the honor of Ambassador for Peace recognition by the Universal Peace Federation. He was conferred Rotary Foundation Award for International Understanding in 1983, which provided him the opportunity to be the Indian representative in the USA, UK, and Canada. His area of research is the economics of human resource development and Indian economy, and has established his credentials in economic journalism and development communication. The next discussant we have is Dr. Alexei Kravchenko. He is an Associate Economics Affairs Officer at the Trade Investment and Innovation Division with the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, Bangkok, Thailand. Experienced economist with a demonstrated history of working in economic analysis, he is skilled in policy analysis, analytical skills, SQL, survey development, and data analysis, and is a strong operations professional with the Doctor of Philosophy in Economics from the University of Waikato, New Zealand. A very warm welcome to all of you. Now I invite Professor Jeff to continue his discussion regarding consumer marketing in COVID times. Over to you, Professor Jeff.
Thank you, Anshita. Can you see me? Yep, okay, good. Yeah. Can everybody see me? I can see me, but I don't know if everybody else can. I don't get much feedback on Zoom. I want to, like the other participants, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate here. This has been a really interesting venue. I spent a lot of my conference time just talking to other business professors and marketing professors, so it's great to get a broader perspective. As Anshita said, my focus is in marketing. I guess I'm the first person to present from the US, which I would argue is the epicenter for political mismanagement of the pandemic. I don't know if there's any other place that's done such a bad job as we have, but if there is, that's I feel bad for them too. So this is unprecedented, as the speaker said. I think Pritam kind of summed it up well, that we're just the unprecedented time where it's multiple. I think of it as threats. It's multiple widespread threats that are hitting us simultaneously. So that's something new. A couple months ago, I was looking at prior pandemics, and they do tend to happen about the same time as an economic downturn, but this is the first one I can remember where the response to the pandemic has actually caused the downturn, and it's quite a frightening, potentially long-lived downturn ahead of us. So I've been giving this some thought. Actually, my co-editors and I have we're going to have a special issue, a focused issue. We're calling it of the Journal of Consumer Research in October, where we're going to talk about. We have several articles that focus on consumer response to threats, and specifically economic threats and health-related threats. So it should be a very timely and relevant issue. So if you're interested in that subject, I encourage you to take a look at that in October in the Journal of Consumer Research. And as part of that, we wrote an article to kind of cap that off, and we've developed a framework of consumer response to threat. And I don't want to go through the whole thing here, but the upshot is that this threat is hitting on multiple levels. There's different types of extensive threats that we talk about, and one could argue this is a very extensive threat that we're facing right now, both economically and health-wise. And then these threats also in turn disrupt various aspects of consumers' lives. For example, as some of the speakers have talked about, people's work habits, not being able to go into the office, having to work from home, people's spending behavior, their social lives, their personal sense of self and their identity, their sense of well-being, some of the rituals and practices. You can't engage in practice of religion as easily, etc. And those disruptions in turn lead to what we call ontological security, or insecurity in this case, which is basically consumer sense of security and well-being. And then that in turn leads consumers to respond. And we've all seen examples of people responding and making their own masks, et cetera, and cooking more from home and entertaining from home and having social gatherings over the internet. And that in turn, the disruptions also create a need for markets and companies and institutions to have adaptive responses. And then we also talk about potential, moderators of that process. But in just terms of the themes of what I see of what's going on in terms of this particular webinar, what I see is some of the major shifts post-pandemic. It's really going to be interesting to actually see how that pans out, because nobody really knows for sure how consumers, at least, will respond or behave after this pandemic. I think initially, at least in terms of the spending that the U.S. government is throwing at the businesses and the consumers, they're under the impression that people are going to revert right back to their old behavior. We're propping up a lot of the restaurant industry, the travel industry, entertainment industry. One could argue, and I think I would argue, that they may not recover. A lot of that may not recover. I think there's going to be, as is always the case, heterogeneity. Some consumers just can't wait to get back to their old behavior, and they will revert right back as soon as they can. But I'd say a large proportion of consumers are going to continue to be wary of gathering in close social spaces for a long time to come. And not only that, so that's the distancing effect. That's the carryover effect of the distancing behavior in the lockdown. But also people's mental budgets, so their actual budgets have shifted a lot during the pandemic, from having been locked down for so long. And habits have changed, because to change a habit is difficult for any of us who have tried to drop a bad habit. But if you lock down and for several months, like many households have had to do, then that gives you an opportunity to reestablish new patterns and new habits, which will tend to be sticky and long-lasting as we move out of the pandemic eventually. Also, social perceptions have changed in many ways. For example, there was a kind of a cultural aversion to people who work from home in the U.S. And I think that has largely changed because now everybody's having to work from home to the extent that you can. And so I think post-pandemic, we'll see a general relaxing of rules, and we might see actually relocation effects where expensive office space is no longer needed. The design of office spaces will have to change because people don't want to be jammed into these open working environments. And also some research has suggested or has found that people's childhood experience as a child really tends to have long-lasting effects throughout their lifetime. Some of the research of people who were born during the Great Depression in the U.S., those effects followed them throughout their lifetime, and we'll see what happens with the kids as a result of the changes that we've seen during the pandemic. So just a few more thoughts here. Just some statistics in terms of why I think things are going to change for the better or worse. So I mentioned earlier the governmental budgets have shifted. The rate of savings in the U.S. now has hit an all-time high. It was tracking about 10%, 8%, and in April it shot up to 33%. And then I think last month, May, it was 23%. So people are putting away a lot of money, and that means that it's going to be painful if they have to start spending money. So we may see that people don't just open up their wallet once the pandemic is over. Secondly, the entertainment industry, like back to this behavioral changes, habit changing. Do people want to sit in a movie theater and have to wear a mask after this is over? Probably a lot don't. And also people become comfortable with streaming video here in the US, at least, with platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime and now Disney Plus and others that are available to stream from the comfort of your home, and actually have streaming parties so you can include the social element. So yeah, a couple more slides here and I'll be done. Again, restaurants. There's lots and lots and lots of restaurants in the US and around the world. And I think we'll see that right now we're seeing them starting to open. People are okay with eating outside, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to be jammed inside, and there's some who do. I mean, we see these pictures of these bars that are really crowded, but there's a lot of people who will not be going to back to that kind of behavior. And also people on the other side, people have found out, especially millennials and Gen Zs, consumers, that cooking isn't so hard. So they don't have to eat out every night. So to the extent that the cooking at home, eating at home is sticky, that's going to have a large effect, potentially a large effect on the restaurant industry. And also the sharing economy. We heard, it seems like ancient history, a few years ago, everybody was talking about, oh, the sharing economy is taking over. They're not talking about that anymore. I mean, are people going to be willing to go into someone's house and they're not sure it's been wiped down? Probably not. In the Airbnb business model may take a hit. Same with Uber, same with Zipcar, some of these other sharing platforms. So it's gonna be interesting to see what they can do to counter consumers' risk perceptions. Because people may think, well, maybe the big hotel chains will do a better job, and the rental car companies do a better job of wiping down their hotel rooms than individual proprietors will. And then, so to wrap things up, I think a large amount of consumer behavior will revert, but I think a significant, and by significant, I mean billions and billions of dollars of spending will shift elsewhere as a result, permanently, probably as a result of the pandemic. So the really great opportunity for research, to do event studies. We've got a natural event occurring. Unfortunately, there's not a control group, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of research rolls out as that looks at these long-lasting effects from the COVID pandemic and economic downturns. So that's all I had. I wanted to share. I think that's only about 10 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jeff. I rightly agree that there's a change in consumer buying behavior during these pandemic times. You have correctly discussed a lot of points regarding it. So now we have Professor M.M. Goyal. He's going to speak on the topic of needonomics for economic recovery post-COVID-19. Unfortunately, Professor Hu had to leave the webinar due to some unavoidable circumstances. Now I hand over to Professor M.M. Goyal. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, dear, for speaking kind words about me. As you have told to the audience that I am coming from Kurukshetra. Most of the people know about Kurukshetra, sadly for Mahabharata, but let me tell, Kurukshetra as a place is the first ever university on the planet. I repeat, Kurukshetra as a place is the first ever university on the planet because the objective of a university is to get knowledge. And the best possible knowledge has been given by Lord Krishna himself in the form of Bhagavad Gita. Let me tell you, Bhagavad Gita is a ism-neutral, religion-free treatise on management, relationship management, and welfare economics. With this note, let me come to the topic of discussion, which the panelists have been talking about. All have been talking about the needs. The issue of need is relevant for everybody. So I would like to develop my thoughts in a very systematic manner. Firstly, let us understand, analyze, and interpret the implications of COVID crisis, both positive and negative implications for the global economy with challenges for India. To my mind, for India, there is one positive implications of COVID crisis, and that is Namaste has become a global etiquette today because of the health protocol of WHO, where we have been talking about physical distancing, no hugging, no shaking hands. Therefore, Namaste has become a good omen for globalization of internationalization of Indianization. So far, negative is concerned. Dr. Paresha was talking about that gender issues are there, and I believe because of the working from home, the domestic violence has increased, and probably that issue has to be taken care of properly. As an economist, I believe that recession, if not depression, is there in the global economy, including India, which our leaders have to understand and accept it. The COVID crisis will prove to be life-changing period for the consumers, producers, distributors, and traders in the global economy, including India, with recession, if not depression. To convert the challenges into opportunities in post-COVID era, we have to be alert, aware, and awake with wisdom and rationality as stakeholders and convert the economy into needonomy, which I have been talking about for reviving the economy. I talk about needonomics, which is basically the common sense approach, which I call economics of needs and no to greed. This is practically flowing from our logo of LIC, where it is being written, Yogam Kshemam Bahamyam, meaning thereby, we have to confine to needs and say no to greed as a consumer. At the same time, if you talk about the producers, distributors, and traders, as the marketing experts know it, that what kind of marketing strategy we have to develop. Let me tell you honestly that this needonomics is basically non-violent, ethical, and spiritual in nature, which must be understood by the world leaders, including the Prime Minister of India and the think tank. I have a website, www.needonomics.com, which has sufficient literature talking about the concept of needonomics, economics of need, and which is basically required to be adopted by almost all the economies of the world if they want to revive in the post-COVID era. From the marketing point of view, as was talked about by speakers, that we have recession from both sides, supply side as well as demand side. Supply side chain has been broken because of the lockdowns, and it is certainly adversing adversely affecting the economy. But from the point of view of demand, how to create demand in the global economy when the market is full of goods available in our malls and departmental stores? How to create that? For that, I have come out with an approach which I call NA approach: need, affordability, and worth of international marketing of the goods and services we need to understand, analyze, and interpret for solving the problems and shifting the gears for the revival of the demand in the global economy. In Indian context, we have to make our goods attractive for global consumers. We have to give brand name to the products of micro, small, medium enterprises, which calls for multinational corporation status to the Khadi Village Industries Commission. We have to think in terms of having aggressive export-oriented approach with diplomacy in pursuing Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan by thinking globally and acting locally, which I call glocalization. Instead of be vocal for local, we have to have glocalization, and we should not do simply lip service for Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as the Indian ethos. We have to think of basically creating jobs, and for that we need to increase the return on training investment for the skills among our youth, which was talked about one of the speakers. To my mind, India can become the global guru of governance if we have to change our looks, action, and words, which I call law of the land. And we have to become street smart consumers, producers, distributors, and traders. Sorry to say, most of our consumers, producers, distributors, and traders are over smart. Many times they are stupid smart. We have to become street smart and simple. I have developed two models in my book, Economics of Human Resource Development, which I want to show you, smart and simple model. Basically, you know, we have to become street smart. Street smart is a person who understands the shocks given to us by the COVID crisis, as well as we have to have common sense approach of understanding the environment today around the world, including India. And to become smart, we should be simple, moral, action-oriented, responsive, and transparent. And to become simple, Mahatma Gandhi has been talking about simple living and high thinking, but I speak of simple living and no thinking. No thinking does not mean that we should not think. We should think of those things which are under our control, and that is the message of my Guru, Bhagavad Gita, which is the heart of Krishna. And how to become simple, I have come out with these attributes in this model. We have to have higher emotional quotient. Gone are the days when we're talking of IQ. We have to have higher emotional quotient. We have to develop love oneself attitude. We have to have health culture. Health culture simply requires to adopt the health protocol of WHO for meeting the requirements of this COVID crisis. That is in terms of social distancing, wearing the mask, as well as washing the hands repeatedly. And we have to eat properly which kind of food we have to eat. And for that, vegetarian food, fasting has been established for health culture. We have to have mental level development. We have to change our mental makeup. We have to stop war of words. We have to stop blame game. Instead of that, we have to change our looks. We have to change our actions. We have to change our words to become better consumers, better producers, better distributors, and better traders. I have an intuition that so far the recovery period is concerned, Professor Pritam Singh was talking about that we will be able to recover within 2 years, but I don't agree with him. I believe that we have to be consistent with Sustainable Development Goals 2030. And I believe that we may take 10 years to revive completely in terms of solving the problem of recession, solving the problem of jobs for the youth, and coming out of the crisis. And I believe it is not because of the materialistic goods, but it is because of the spiritually guided materialism. I believe the rate of progress in spirituality is faster than the rate of progress in materialism. So I believe we have to confine to needs, affordability and worth of the product as a producer, distributor, and trader, and we have to confine to needs as a consumer. Therefore, we can take care of all the dimensions. So let me repeat that needonomics as a common sense approach needs to be understood, analyzed, interpreted, and adopted not only by consumers, but producers, distributors, and traders for coming out of the crisis in post-COVID era and revive the economy. With these words, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Goel. It was indeed a nice pleasure to listen. And within a very short span of time, you have explained really well what the concept of needonomics is like. I'm sure it would lead to the recovery of the economics post-COVID-19. Now I request Dr. Alexei to continue the discussion with the perspective of SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals, and COVID-19 pandemic. Over to you, Dr. Alexei.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you for listening. So I'm going to bring a bit of a trade perspective here because I'm an economist at Trade Investment and Innovation Division at the United Nations office in Bangkok. Now, before COVID was a thing earlier this year, I was working on things that are called non-tariff measures. Now, these are policies that can affect imports or exports and policies other than tariffs. And these policies can be quite necessary for sustainable development. They can help to protect human and animal health and can also protect the environment. For instance, certain sanitary measures at borders can ensure the consumers don't get sick when eating food. Bans on CFCs can protect the ozone layer, so on. So these are domestic policies that can potentially affect trade. They can sometimes, these non-tariff measures, be counterproductive. So when COVID hit, many countries in fact implemented such counterproductive non-tariff measures. The knee-jerk reaction has been to put on various export restraints on medical equipment, masks, what do you call it, hand gels and things like that. Now, this was very understandable, but it was counterproductive because many countries in the world don't actually have the productive capacity to produce face masks or ventilators or even the hand gels. And if anything, this crisis has shown that countries are very much related and problem of one can very readily spread into all of its neighbors. After that, again, with non-tariff measures, some governments started to worry about food security. And a few major food exporters in the region, Asia-Pacific regions, put export bans again on rice and other staple products. But they didn't really have to worry about that. There's actually now a dip in the global demand, and the government in Thailand, for instance, just announced they have to bail out the rice farmers, even though they were worried about food security. The recent flare-up in Beijing, if you heard, was a little bit scary because it was initially claimed that the source of virus was frozen food. So the Chinese were considering to setting another non-tariff measures, which was a COVID-free certification on imports of food. However, the current health advice is there is no evidence that COVID can be transmitted through trade in food. And there's basically an argument that this is not a scientifically justified non-tariff measures and it should not be implemented by China. While they have been putting a lot of bans and certain procedures to fight COVID, they have actually been trying to facilitate importation of certain products. So particularly health products, a lot of countries have reduced tariffs on health products, reduced tariffs on masks, simplified the procedures, addressed procedural obstacles, and generally facilitated trade. So that's actually a good thing. And a lot of countries are now trying to put a lot of these trade procedures online and trying to increase the efficiencies. So starting March this year, countries around the world start going to lockdowns. Obviously, this was going to impact the production and imports and exports, but no industry, no sector has been as badly impacted as tourism. Again, as late as March this year, certain newspapers and the articles were saying that tourism may drop by as much as 1% this year. Funny now because even back then it was obvious it's going to be a lot more than 1%. In fact, just today, the government in Thailand, a country that depends 20% of its GDP on tourism, has said that maybe, just maybe, by the end of next year, they'll be able to see some tourists back when the vaccine hopefully will be ready. And that's a year and a half from now. So a lot more than 1%. It was initially hard to keep track of these restrictions. Back in March, I'd asked one of my interns to see which country was trying to restrict what. So what happened was first, most countries would say, well, okay, if you from Wuhan in China, you probably shouldn't come here, or if you're from China, you shouldn't come there. And then if you're from Italy or from Spain or from the United States, and escalate it rapidly. And there's no sense that it's going to be let up anytime soon. The governments are now trying to encourage domestic tourism. In some cases, it's going to help. In most cases, particularly for countries that depend a lot on international tourism, such as a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, it's going to be quite hard. But another unfortunate thing is that some governments, as well as some other vocal proponents and opponents of globalization, seem to try to encourage consumers to buy locally. This then moves away from international trade. Now, the way international trade, at least in theory, works is that production is allocated according to comparative advantage. So long story short is that potentially trade can make everyone better off. Trade can potentially benefit everyone. In fact, international trade lifted over 700 million people above poverty line in China alone. And I was reading just recently, within the last decade or so, a couple of hundred people in India as well. But if the governments are encouraging consumers to buy local, it's going to create less trade, and that means in total everybody will have less. Now, no trade sounds great for some people, but many countries might not have the productive capacity to produce everything. Many countries can't make their own medicines. What about electricity? Not every country has the technology to make solar panels or wind turbines. They'll have to import them. If they can't trade, should they burn coal that's available nearby? Perhaps not. What about the wires to conduct that electricity? What if the mineral is not available? Maybe they should import them instead. What if your particular area has fantastic soil for making tea, but there's only so much the locals can drink? The soil would not be suitable to grow rice. That creates inefficiencies. Technically, it can be self-sustainable, but in essence, everybody will have a bit less. And again, having less trade may not always be necessarily that green. For example, a while ago, many people in the UK were told to look at food miles, or essentially how far does food have to travel, assuming that if it's further away, it burns more energy in transportation. It's worse for the environment. Well, a lot of people in the UK were buying lamb from New Zealand, which was as far away from the UK as you could possibly get. The problem, however, is that the research studies have shown that the New Zealand lamb was actually more sustainable, more green, better for the environment, but the UK lamb, because New Zealand lamb was grass-fed and did not require heating over the winter. UK winters were a little bit more harsh, and they needed overwinter heating, which actually spent a lot more energy than the transportation from New Zealand to the UK. So just to conclude here, it's not a given that trade is not great. One of the arguments was also given that you should not depend on one country, one big country to supply you everything or be the biggest market. And in fact, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely not. You should definitely diversify. You can even see parallels with the OPEC oil crisis in the 1970s because countries depended on those few countries in the monopoly. They managed to destroy the world economies for a little while. So the answer to that was not domestic production, it was diversification. And as the crisis in the 70s went on, the OPEC saw its market share plummet by almost half, and that actually helped the economy to get out of the crisis. So in the end, I just wanted to say that to post-COVID really should be looking at going back to trade, green trade, and incidentally, greening the trade will be is the name of our next year's Asia Pacific Trade and Investment Report. We'll be talking more about that then, and I encourage you to look at that report.
Thank you, Dr. Alexei. We all know that during this COVID time or the pandemic situation alarming everywhere in the world, it is severely affecting planet Earth in every which way. And I guess this was something which wasn't foreseen before, much before, like very much, it just came recently, and all of a sudden, in short span of time, it took over throughout the world. I hereby would like to add or build an argument or a debate. We can take it up in the question and answer round as well, that the Sustainable Development Goals, UN has presented 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and the target is given for like 2030. By 2030, we are focusing on those 17 SDGs and trying to fulfill them. But do we think during this pandemic situation, will those goals be achieved by 2030, or it would be extended? On that note, I again thank all the discussants for their timely and useful perspectives. Now I invite Dr. Gagandeep Sharma to proceed with question and answer session from the audience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Anshita, and thank you all the speakers. I think it has been a very interesting session with all across the topics being taken into account. I have certain points which the audience has raised during this, but I also have some points which have come to my mind as a student of economics and student of sociology, for that matter. A couple of questions which I wanted to address to Professor Pritam Singh. He has had to leave for a meeting, and I would still put those questions up because I know that all our panelists and discussants are competent enough. Glenn and Paresha, may I put some of these questions to you? For example, one of the very prominent questions which was asked by one of the audiences, and Professor Pritam made a very valid point in saying that there is a need to balance the climate change now. Time has come to manage the climate change, and Keynesian model doesn't apply anymore, because at that point in time, climate was not a problem. Demand more, supply more, produce more was one of the solutions at some points in time. But today that solution doesn't remain anymore, particularly because of the climate change kind of challenges which we are now seeing. It would be in fact a very indifferent kind of attitude for the economies to respond to that. So so my first idea that I would like to hear maybe from Glenn and Paresha, whosoever wants to reflect upon that, is that how do you think the Keynesian economics, when Keynesian economics doesn't work, so which economics does work? I am aware of the Hayek versus Keynes kind of crisis and debate at the time, during the times of 1960s further, and then 70s, when we realized that Keynesian economics doesn't hold and Hayekian economics does hold. So where are we standing today? Do you see any model in economic history which you feel that can be a solution, or do you think it is the time to have a new model? So that way, from Glenn or Paresha, one of you, I would like to hear. And then, of course, I would like to throw this to Jeff also, because this also deals with the consumption and demand and the production concept, supply concept. Yeah, Glenn, would you like to take it up?
Well, certainly. So can you all hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, certainly I'd like to take this up. I think that what we have is kind of to differentiate between the basic needs of people who are living in conditions where the downturn of the economy will lead to their threaten their own survival in the poorest of the poor in many developing countries, as opposed to when we're considering about people who are living in relative poverty in more developed countries. I sometimes go back in my thinking in terms of economics, go back to Aristotle and thinking about the oikonomia, which is about the production and the distribution and consumption of the needs of the household or of the community. And I think that what is missing is this kind of sense that Aristotle thought that beyond a certain kind of point of necessity of providing for the needs of the community or the household, that this just the accumulation of wealth was actually dehumanizing. And that was unnecessary and dehumanizing. And so it's sort of like, how do you engage in, the difficulty is to how to engage in a global discussion where you have people in very affluent countries who are concerned with their loss of kind of consumptive patterns, right? But we're all in this system. At the same time, you have like kind of this massive challenge where, you know, it could literally lead to kind of starvation or disease of a mass number of people. And I think that, so for me to go back to Aristotle as a Western perspective and the Western, Western philosophy, right? But I think it's not entirely unconnected, right? With what some of the other panelists were talking about kind of like this concern for the environment and the whole kind of biosphere that we're a part of, or the source of Hindu texts to talk about kind of the relationship between people and their community and things.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff, would you like to put some thoughts on it, maybe in a minute or 2 minutes?
Sure. So my background though is in engineering and business, so I'm not going to get into the philosophy of things, but in general, I think that there's a trend, and I think the COVID pandemic will continue or actually accelerate that trend to think about things beyond just the needs of the shareholders by big corporations. A lot of corporations have signed on to the kind of the triple bottom line notion that you have multiple firms have multiple constituencies. One of those is the environment. So the question will become, is that going to be sustainable, or is that going to be considered just a luxury? And when times get tough, companies go back to, we got to stay alive to be able to do these sort of things. And I don't know the answer to that. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I would like to think that this has kind of highlighted the need to really take a more of a long-term perspective and long-term view. But, the problems is with capitalism and stock markets are that the companies tend to be a little too short-sighted, and they're just looking at the next quarterly statement. So we'll see.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'll come back to you, Paresha, in a while about another important point, because we have talked about the long-term recovery, how the long-term recovery path would be. We have talked about the Keynesian model. I have brought into perspective the Haykian model for that matter. And what about the short term? I'll come back to you with that in a minute. But at the same point in time, one of the important questions which comes up for us being the critical management scholars is, again, I take a leaf from Professor Pritam's book, and I go back to also to what Professor Goel was indicating towards the needonomics, for that matter, or need versus greed, or for that matter, I also bring into perspective the debate between rationality vis-a-vis spirituality. And in one school of thought, I argue that spirituality leads to crony capitalism in a way. So that's always debatable concept. But at the same time, my question here is what my friend Dr. Sanjay Kumar had asked in the Q&A. His question was that if we go back to the village localization, which was talked about by Pritam, and at the same time was also highlighted in a way by Professor Goel. Is it going back to the Gandhian times? Because we are talking about the non-violent economics. I know I am a student of economics myself, and I have read J.C. Kumarappa, who's the Gandhian economist, the renowned Gandhian economist. Are we going back to the Gandhian times? I've also read A. Nagraj, who's the modern kind of indigenous economist, and kind of thoughts that he gave were more humane. But my question here is that what about the caste system? Does that village-centric system not hold the potential to bring back the caste bias? Because then people would be going back to the professions according to their caste. Is this a threat that looms large if we go back to the village society system? Of course, there are advantages. If we do not travel, there are advantages to the climate change. But what about the threat of caste system? This is one of the concepts, one of the questions which was put forth by one of my audiences. Paresha, would you like to take it up? Because you highlighted it in a big way in your presentation.
Yes, I would say that I think all of us are grappling with where we should reset the world, if you like, the ecosystem and the world. Where do we want to go? How do we want to go to our past, or do we want to recognize the past was also not perfect? Yes. So we have a lot of learning over the years about what was wrong with the village system, if that is what you are talking about. And so even if we revert to some of the good, I think the challenge here is to pick up the good parts of different systems, what we have experienced over the centuries, and learn from the mistakes made by each of those systems, and create something new, which is resilient, in which the system is resilient, system is supportive of the underprivileged, or is able to take care of the reduce the inequalities. I do not see the possibility of inequalities disappearing, but at least we can move towards a reduction of inequalities, and in that sense we have to learn from our mistakes in the past, the more current mistakes of global capitalism. But I do not see that we have to go only to the village society and local self-sufficiency, because in doing that, if the consumption patterns contract too much, the transition part of this economies may be kind of, those whose livelihoods are on the export economy. We will disrupt those systems to a greater extent, and we will damage the things, those types of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Glenn, I can see that you are inclined to answer this being a sociologist, but I'll come back to you in a while. Let me go to the other person who would be probably be very keen to answer this, and we are also equally
Gavin,
keen.
can I make a...
You are here. You are here. Good.
Yeah. I just got a few more minutes. On this last question you asked, this point, that when I was talking about meeting local needs and gearing economies towards localization, it was not necessarily returning back to the village economy. Local economy can take place even in urban economies. There's an argument about urban gardening, urban vegetable growing. There are in very big cities, there are allotments where people are growing their own vegetables, etc. So that's, it shouldn't be equated with the village. Secondly, it is a misnomer to think that caste system disappears once the village economy disappears, because caste has reproduced itself in huge urban agglomeration, and caste has reappeared in the diaspora. There is a very big debate going on in England that caste discrimination should be also made illegal in the same way race discrimination, gender discrimination, disability discrimination has been made illegal. And people in America, Canada, maybe in Australia, New Zealand are also looking for those debates. So caste is something very intrinsic to Hinduism. And the upper caste Hindus have reproduced the caste system and it has also affected other religious minorities. Sikhs and Muslims who are not supposed to have caste system, they also have the caste system, though not as viciously as in the Sanatani Hindu religion. This belief that a village economy disintegrates, caste system will also disintegrate, is a misunderstanding of the resilience and the strength of the caste system. The caste system has to be fought at a different level, and this is my kind of response to your point of view. But I have to leave because thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I'm so grateful that you were here to take up this. And this is a kind of a very bold statement that if caste system disappears, if village system disappears, does the caste system also disappear? This is a very bold statement, and I think this is something to be noted as one key takeaway. Capitalism doesn't essentially take away the caste system. About the rural-urban, let me also bring into perspective example of my own. In recent times, we were doing a project with some colleagues from Plymouth University in the UK, and in that project we were about to put up the issue of space, that how can we regather and regain our space. When I say we, the underprivileged lot. The question was answered beautifully by one of the societies, which is based out of a township in Hyderabad. Hyderabad is down south in India, where people have started doing everything that villages used to do, but they are living in a society. They have created an urban society in which they are doing almost everything that the rural system was doing, positive things, taking away, doing away with the negatives of the casteism, etc. The society is called R-urban. So you can Google it out and see at some point in time to see how things are happening. One of my important questions, which I would like to certainly take it up, and it was also relevant not only to the critical economic and management thought, but also to the critical education thought. One of the respondents one of the audience was interested in knowing that what are the future employment scenarios? We know that we are moving from skilled jobs to unskilled jobs, but at the same time, as Paresha rightly said, that one challenge is that the top end people have work from home, but lower end people do not have any work from home. But at the same time, one of the points which has also come up is that some of the school teachers had to go back to some unskilled jobs, which were probably, they were not expecting to do that throughout their lives, but they had no other option but to do that. Now, in such a scenario, what are the future employment opportunities that we see? What are the future career options that we can see? I would like to take a couple of more questions. So therefore, may I request Jeff to reflect upon this question, maybe in 2 minutes. what do you see as the important research employment opportunities and future career options? And since I'm passing it on to you, Jeff, I would want you to answer one more question of mine. This has not been put up by the audience, but I am inclined to know this because you're dealing with the Journal of Consumer Research, which is an A-star journal. Do you think that the academic researchers are in some way addressing the challenges, particularly social science researchers, are addressing the challenges of the pandemic in a policy-oriented way? Do you think that is happening? So these two questions for Jeff, please.
What was the first question?
My first question was future employment scenario. And
future employment, right. I mean, I think it's like I mentioned in my discussion, I think a lot of industries will be fundamentally negatively and maybe positively impacted. So I think we'll have to see some shifts, some labor shifts. I think there'll be some opportunities that open as a result of some of the shifting behaviors in terms of companies, in terms of supply chains. I think it's an opportunity for, as answered an email or a question on the Q&A, somebody asked if there's an opportunity for India with all the pushback that's happening with the West against China. I think there certainly is, because a lot of companies are reevaluating their supply chain and want to become want to lessen their dependence on China. So I think that really creates a lot of potential opportunities for India to the extent that they can help companies relocate their supply chains. And then within a country, just the consumer changes and behavior will create opportunities, and also some threats. There'll be some industries that have a big slowdown, like here in the U.S. The travel industry, the airlines are talking about laying off tens of thousands of employees, and it's not clear that with companies discovering that a meeting over Zoom can take the place of somebody flying out and staying in a hotel for a day or two. That may be a long-term change. So I think there'll be some opportunities for, but also some shifts.
Right.
So the
academic research.
What?
Academic research.
Yeah, academic research. Yeah, there's actually a lot of the research in JCR tends to have a policy aspect to it, where it's not really. I mean, some of the research is focused on helping companies do a better job, serving consumers. But a lot of the research is really about what are some policy implications. Now, in terms of writing policy papers, that you really don't see that much in JCR. That's in the field of marketing. There's the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing that does a lot of that, and maybe Journal of Marketing for that sort of thing. But there are conceptual papers, how it has to be consumer focused to be in JCR. So the extent that there's consumer focused policy implications, like I was just talking about, then yes, that would be something we'd be interested in.
Right. Thank you very much, Jeff. And quickly, I'll take two more questions. I have 3 to 4 minutes left for me. May I put this to Professor Goel, please, to respond quickly. A lot of our speakers talked about the social welfare mechanism. So we know that Glenn and of course Jeff also highlighted, Jeff said it in a sarcastic way, that the US is the epicenter of political mismanagement of the pandemic, which I kind of agree. And of course, every country is coming out with its own model of mismanagement. So that way, what is the social welfare mechanism as per your model of needonomics? If you can be very brief and highlight some of the mechanisms which you feel would be taken care of by your model.
Thank you, Gaganji. Practically, let me tell you, the rational behavior of a consumer is not only for its own satisfaction. To my mind, it is selfish. If at all, in terms of social welfare measures, we have to think in terms of altruism. Altruism means not me, but you, which I have learned as a student when I was NSS volunteer, and we were trying to understand what is this not me, but you. Practically, the governments are not sufficient to satisfy the poor people, distributing them free goods. Therefore, it is the responsibility of every individual to think in terms of confining to reasonable consumption, which I call needonomics, and that will lead to increase in their domestic saving. Let me honestly tell you, China is ahead of us because their domestic saving rate is 15% higher to us. Therefore, in case we want to survive, exist, and excel in post-COVID era, we have to think in terms of domestic saving rate, which is possible only by confining to needs and to have reconciling the issue with altruism for social welfare. We have to have the resources which are basically limited in nature. Therefore, it is our duty, responsibility to think in terms of confining to needs and spare something for others to share with us. And that perfectly goes in tune with the rural economy. Let me tell you, I have written an article.
Sir, we are running out of time. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. My last question, I want to take up so many more questions which audience has raised, but my last question, Glenn, is directed at you. Paresha made a very interesting point that existing inequalities are being exaggerated during these times and new inequalities are being created. Let me bring it into one more perspective as a critical political scientist or a student of political science in a critical way. I feel that the governments are also kind of surprising the masses during these times or shocking the masses during these times. For example, in India, the lockdown was announced with only 4 hours to prepare for it. I mean, that sounds ridiculous at times and shocking at times. So how do you think, are the inequalities increasing? Do you think that there is a way that we can manage not only the crisis, but also the problem or the challenge posed by the lockdowns? Because one is the problem due to the pandemic, second is the problem due to the pandemic management. I put it as a challenge of lives vis-a-vis livelihoods. So what are your thoughts on that, particularly in the context a little bit, if you can take it in from a political scientist context as well? But 2 minutes.
Okay, I will try. All right, yes, it seems that the world at this moment has a crisis of leadership. That is, we have leaders who appear willing to sink the ship for the purposes of winning a small battle, and the lack of this knowledge that we're all on the same, as societies, we're all on the same ship, and as a world, we're all on the same, we're in a finite ecosystem and so on. So, I don't know how to get around that. I think I don't think that the entire world is going to become suddenly democratic, because there are certain regions like the Middle East that is authoritarian, and also, but certainly in the democratic countries, it seems that the influence of political influence of capital is out of control. And so, as Dr. Inman was saying, kind of this sense that not just the corporate stakeholders are much broader than the stockholders, but also that the people are stakeholders of the government services as well. And so I'm from the United States also, and I thought the bailouts of 2008, 2009 were really, really sad. And also, because I remember growing up with the public benefit of the buildings and the roads and the electrification and all these things that came out of the Great Depression, which really benefited the entire country. It built the infrastructure, and so just giving the banks trillions was not didn't sort of trickle down into the people in any sort of way. And so I guess I danced around your question. I'm sorry, but I don't have a great answer. I live in the UAE, which is has a beneficent authoritarian government, in that actually the leadership here has enriched the population, and it has enriched the many of the people who just live here and work here. Half of which seem people come from South Asia. And, but then again, we have the authoritarian governments in some places that are really terrible, where the people live in poverty, and so I don't know. I mean, I guess yes. Enough time. Sorry.
That makes sense, and I'm sure that answering all the questions is not what we intend to do in a workshop, in a webinar. It is more about raising the questions rather than answering those. So I think all of your talks have raised some very pertinent questions, which we would have to seek answers together. As a popular poet says, that I only know the truth of my share, of my part. All truth is known by all. So that way, I am really grateful to all of you, and I pass it on to my colleague Mansi to propose a note of thanks. Mansi, 2 minutes.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Gagan. The outbreak of COVID pandemic has put the economic foundations of world economy at a major risk. The crisis has exposed many weaknesses of the growth-obsessed capitalist economy, which fails to take care of the people and maintain a sustainable environment. This webinar has proposed a debate on the development of alternative models of globalization. The discussion has also highlighted on the impact of global economy and financial crisis precipitated by such events like COVID-19 pandemic on the international financial system. The webinar has discoursed the long-term effects of COVID-19 in the context of continuous globalization and the need to chart a course for a global economy transformation towards sustainability. With this, I would like to conclude on our session. Firstly, we would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our reputed speakers, Professor Pritam, Professor Glenn, and Dr. Paresha, for their valuable contributions to this increasing conversation, and our esteemed discussants, Professor Jeff, Professor Goel, and Dr. Alexei, for their time and efforts and for providing us with your critical inputs for our early career scholars and practitioners to better navigate the uncertainties brought about by COVID-19 in the context of business and socio-economic challenges. We would also like to thank our organizers from the Academy of Management's Critical Management Studies In Touch team members, particularly Kathleen, Ozan, Alexandra, and their colleagues for their constant technical support and assistance. We would also like to thank Dr. Ajay from Punjab University, Dr. Gagan, Dr. Sanchita, Gaurav, Anshita, and Isha from Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University for moderating and conducting the session. Last but not the least, we would like to thank all our viewers and attendees for joining us on this webinar. We hope that you're able to get some thought-provoking ideas from this 120 minutes much involving discussion. If you have any questions, then you may write to us on the email provided in the chat box, and we may get in touch with you. Thank you so much. It's a wrap. Now over to you, Kathleen. Thank you.
Mansi, and thanks to the team as well. Okay, so it's a wrap. So we're going to say good afternoon or good morning or good evening or good night to wherever you are in the world. Just to remind you of our upcoming webinars. So next week we have another webinar in the CMS In Touch webinar series. That's on second careers in critical management studies. So people who come into their careers in the critical management community either after a more traditional trajectory or from a different sector or profession. In September we have a webinar on calling universities to action against racism. That's on the 9th of September. And finally, the fantastic team who have presented today's webinars will be continuing their webinar series. If you'd like to be added to the distribution list for further webinars organised by today's hosts, if you could get in touch with Dr. Gagandeep Sharma, and that's his email address there. So in the meantime, I'd like to say thanks so much to the team organising today's webinars. Thank you so much to the speakers and the discussants, and hopefully we'll see you all next week for the next CMS In Touch webinar series. Thank you and take care of yourselves.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.